Well, first of all, thank you all again for joining us this morning for another Facebook Live. Today, we have the awesome privilege of having a very close friend of mine and someone who I know for a fact works tirelessly within our community in Washington, D.C. On a lot of the matters that's important to us on a daily basis. But before I even introduce who she is, I do want to give some stats of some things that we're currently experiencing when we look at the coronavirus. Currently, right now, within the state of Florida, we have 9,008 cases currently right now, with 144 deaths, 1,167 hospital admissions. In Broward County, we have 1,481 cases with 17 deaths. In Miami-Dade County, we have 2,886 deaths with 20 hospitalizations. I'll be very honest with you all that we are definitely in a extreme critical time, and I know that there are a lot of outcries for help. I know our emails in our office have been blowing up because people are looking for relief when it comes to unemployment. I do want to let you know that if you are looking for that relief, www.floridajobs.org is the website. Please let me say this ahead of time that I do understand that there is a huge issue with the website, and we are working along with a lot of different elected officials when it comes to the Department of Economic Opportunity and how they're handling the website to ensure that people can have access. So if you can just continue to bear with us as we work with the department, you have the word from our office. We'll continue to work alongside them to do that. And with that being said, I know I started off talking about her and sharing who she is, but she represents Broward County extremely well in Washington, D.C. And I have the awesome privilege to have her as our guest for today. And that is none other than Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, also known as DWS on Twitter. So I'm going to give you the floor, Congresswoman.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Representative Jones, and also known to near and dear friends as Chev. And I'm just thrilled to be able to join you and our mutual constituents and fans of yours, rightfully so, on Facebook Live and via Zoom. We're all in a brave new world right now.
Yes.
I hope everybody who is listening to us and watching us here is staying safe and is healthy. The most important thing, and I will start with this and likely end with it, is that we've seen just how serious this virus is. And as Dr. Fauci, our nation's foremost public health expert, who has thankfully been on the front lines of this and been guiding us every day on what we need to be doing, is we really need to make sure that we, for lack of a better term, respect this virus. This virus is a nightmare, and it is whom controls the timeline, as Dr. Fauci said. We don't control the timeline. Politicians can't make this, vanish by, through economic investments and artificial means. This is something that we have to get through together and do it in a cooperative way by making sure that we keep ourselves at home, that we heed the social distancing guidelines. I have to tell you, Chev, I was out. I had to run out yesterday to deal with a medical issue, and not for me. And I was astonished at how many people were out on the roads in their cars. Now, there are certainly too many different types of exemptions in the governor's statewide stay-at-home order that allow people to be defined as working for an essential business. But it wasn't quite near a regular workday, but I had not been out of the house and on the roads in a number of days, save to go to Publix, and it worries me that people really aren't taking this seriously. And I just want to ask people again, heed the warnings. Make sure that you are not spending time with people with whom you don't need to spend time. And just make sure that we can flatten the curve of this virus, but because we don't have a cure, we don't have a treatment, we don't have a vaccine yet, and we won't likely have one for some time. So I just, this is from your self-appointed Jewish mother. Please make sure. Make sure. I know it's hard. It's hard for us too. The silver lining for us in our family, Chev, is that my twins came home from college, so they're with us. We're all under one roof together, and that's been a while, few years since that's happened, and so that's been a blessing. But we just really all have to make sure we stay safe. So not to belabor that point, but I want to thank you for the true champion that you've been always, but particularly in this crisis, making sure that we can be connected to our constituents and doing so in any way possible on any platform is absolutely critical. It's going to be super important for us to be able to reach our seniors because maybe they're not so Zoom and Facebook Live proficient, and so we gotta try to make sure that we're being creative and doing everything we can to be able to try to reach those that are not technologically reachable. So I know I'm working on ways to do that. We're holding telephone town halls because thankfully, most people do have access to a telephone and can listen in. So we'll keep you posted about that. But we are in the midst of a once in a century event here with this virus. I know I've hosted several meetings and will continue to do that. But I just have to stress that we're only at the beginning of feeling the full force of this crisis. The numbers that you cited at the top of this program are sobering. It's going to get worse for us before it gets better here in Florida, and we have to rise to the challenge together. I want to talk about what Congress has been doing. We've passed 3 important pieces of legislation. The most recent was the CARES Act, which you've been hearing about. The most recently, that was the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. I'll refer to it as the CARES Act as I give my overview. That third piece of legislation was signed into law just a week ago. So, that's how real-time, rapidly we're dealing with this. We've been dealing with this over the last 5 weeks. The first bill we passed was an $8.3 billion emergency appropriations supplemental. And I sit on the Appropriations Committee, was proud to be part of getting that passed. That paid for free testing for everyone, for research and development of vaccines and therapeutics so that we can eventually make sure we don't have to go through this again, and to help buy medical supplies like masks. The second bill was the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And that actually guaranteed free testing for all individuals. And it was a worker-focused piece of legislation that made sure that we had up to 14 days of paid sick leave, at least for everyone who works for a business that employs less than 500 people. 89% of the businesses in America, and I wanted it to cover everyone, Democrats certainly did, 89% of the businesses in America that have more than 500 employees do provide some type of sick leave, paid sick leave, but the ones under 500 did not. So coronavirus-related sick leave, if you're caring for yourself, a sick family member, need to take that time, that's available to you. Also, up to 3 months of paid family or medical leave. Again, extended leave that goes beyond the 14 days if you have a corona-related illness in your family or you're dealing with yourself. And then the last bill is the CARES Act, which is $2 trillion with a T, and it won't be our last bill, that makes sure that we focused on the people who needed it most. We didn't take care of big business and corporations in this bill. We focused our effort on smaller businesses, on individuals. So it just want to cover a couple of main points on it, and then I'm happy to take questions. We put $377 billion from the CARES Act into small businesses and $560 billion to go to individuals for direct payments. If you're one of those small businesses that are affected by COVID-19, there are various small business grant and loan programs, some that we created newly for this virus, like the Pandemic Protection Act, and others that are like the Economic Disaster Recovery Act, which exists already, that we expanded. So you may be able to take advantage of new programs. I'm sorry, not pandemic. There's a lot of P's. Paycheck protection. We got a lot of P's going on here. Paycheck protection program, so that small businesses can keep your workforce in place. Those are loans that you can take that convert to grants as long as you retain your employees during the particular window that is specified in the law. And then there's and that's a debt forgiveness fund. We also have emergency economic injury grant programs. And you should go to the Small Business Administration, SBA.gov, to get information about those. The Paycheck Protection Program did launch today, and so you can start to get information on SBA's website about that. $154 billion will go to fighting the public health crisis, money to our hospitals and labs, tens of billions of dollars for loan forgiveness, student loan abatement and forgiveness, food security programs. Their people are already starting to struggle financially. We saw the unemployment numbers, the unemployment rate nationally ticked up to 4.4%. Yesterday, we learned we had 6.6 million new people apply for unemployment benefits. Our unemployment system in Florida is an absolute disaster. Wow. Unfortunately, that was intentional. Rick Scott, our former governor, basically destroyed the system so that he could improve his employment numbers. Not going to look back here, but Governor DeSantis needs to. They could have. He's been in office for a couple of years now. He could have started to get this fixed and just decided to leave it in place the way it was, which is unacceptable. And now they're having to shift to paper applications because they just don't have the capacity on this website to even allow people to register, Chev. And what's happening, and I learned this on my town hall the other day, I had Ken Lawson, who's the director of the Economic Opportunity Division, which handles the reemployment, as they call it, on the unemployment compensation system. And they just don't have enough personnel. Too many people are having to reset their PIN, and they can't do that online. And unfortunately, at the moment, the benefits are not retroactive. So if you've been out of work for 2 weeks, let's say, and you're having trouble getting onto that website or applying to actually get yourself registered in the system, you won't be able to get the benefits, the unemployment benefits, from the 2 weeks that you missed trying to get registered in the first place, which is insane. I mean, you guys need to, the governor needs to call you back into special session and change things, particularly as it relates to coronavirus, to get that fixed.
Congresswoman, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, of course.
Since you're talking about, and because I want you to continue, but for those, there are some small churches who have been asking about as far as where do they receive their relief for their employees. Is that the same method where they will go through for the churches, for their employees receive through SBA?
Nonprofits are eligible for the small business relief that's in this bill, and the way it works, but they're not eligible in the same way. A 501c3 is not eligible in the same way as a for-profit business is. Right. So they've got to reach out and inquire to SBA on the details. But I think they're eligible for 50%, and it is also tied to employee retention. The rules work differently for nonprofit businesses, and what it's supposed to be for is operating expenses, taking a loan for your operating expenses, making sure you can maintain your payroll, keep people at the same full salary they had. Smaller nonprofits like churches won't have tons of employees, but it'll still help a little bit. Right. So a little bit goes a long way.
Thank you for that.
And I'll just finish to finish up. You should try to reach out to the Department of Economic Opportunity, particularly if you've lost your job. That's the agency in Florida that handles the unemployment system. But these guys are going to. This agency is going to really need to get their act together, and we'll get you information. We should try to get folks information about how they can apply on paper, because that's going to be really important. Chev, also what churches can also apply for is the pandemic unemployment assistance, We passed in the CARES Act. This is really important, especially in Florida, because our benefits are so stingy. I mean, you're only eligible in Florida for a maximum of $275 a week at the top of the payment, and they also only allow 12 weeks, the stingiest in the country. But Congress in the CARES Act, what we did is we added 13 weeks of benefits that are coronavirus. It's a pandemic payment program where we will add $600 a week for 13 additional weeks. Wow. To the whatever the benefits are that an unemployed individual is eligible for in their state. So that will help a lot. And by the way, Rick Scott actually offered an amendment to get rid of that, and thankfully Democrats were able to defeat that amendment and make sure that payment stayed in place, because we're sure going to need it here.
Yes.
So that's that's really the overall summary. I also want to just cover the individual rebate that was included in the CARES Act as well. As you've probably heard, it's a $1,200 payment to individuals who earned less than $75,000, and up to $99,000 it starts to reduce, and then over $99,000 an individual is not eligible for the rebate. Couples are eligible for $2,400. That's up to 100 if they earn up to $150,000, and it caps out at $198,000. After that, you're not eligible for that payment. It's if you already have been submitting tax returns, then the IRS these payments will be made automatically, and they'll be deposited into the account that they already have on file for you. People who do not file tax returns are eligible for this payment as well. And thankfully, at least for senior citizens and for many others, we had to fight to try to get the IRS not to require the filing of a simple tax return. So that's no longer required for some people, but they didn't eliminate the requirement for everybody. But they will start making those payments on a schedule. And I think April 13th is when the first group of payments will start to be made. But this is a process that will last between now and all the way to September. So wow. So it's not like it's going to turn on a dime and all these rebates are going to pop out of the system quickly, unfortunately.
So Debbie, I guess I want to start there before we get to questions from other people. You said something when you said this won't be our last bill, because you made it clear that this is something that we know is going to go on for a long time. Do you see a scenario where you all would have to pass another bill to give Americans more money?
Yes, no question. We're already working on that. Speaker Pelosi has begun convening us, both in the Appropriations Committee as well as the major authorizing committees, to craft mostly legislation that is going to include huge investments in infrastructure. Now, we're going to need cooperation from the Republican majority in the Senate, but this is why divided government is helpful, because that way it's not just one party rule where one philosophy is driving all the decision making. I'm here just to provide information, but some stuff is just reality that people need to know. So we're also going to continue to craft worker-friendly assistance so that we can make sure that we're maintaining the help that we know people are going to need. So we're working on that already, and we want to make sure that we can craft legislation that is going to be tied and tailored to what people's needs are. And so, I don't think we're going to see that fourth bill pop out very quickly, but I would expect later this month, later in April, that's likely when we'll I'm hopefully be able to pass a bill like that we can get agreement on through unanimous consent without having to drag people back to Washington, and while we're still in the midst of needing to keep ourselves socially distant.
I understood. And so there's some questions that were asked prior to this. It's been 7 days since the president signed the CARES Act into law. This law is supposed to bring $2 trillion of relief to Americans. Can you tell us what this means for Floridians when they should be expecting this relief?
Yes. So as I just mentioned, the rebates that were part of the CARES Act, the $1,200 rebates and $2,400 to individuals who make less than, the $1,200 rebates that for people who make less than 75,000, 2,400 for couples who make less than 150. Those payments will begin to be made according to what the Secretary of the Treasury has been saying over the course of the next, starting, let's say today's April 3rd. So in about 10 days, the first tranche of payments will start to be made. And then another tranche is, I think, made April 13th is the first one, May 4th, I believe, is the second one. But it's going to take, for some people, all the way to September for them to get these checks out. And then we also need to make sure that we get the rest of the folks who don't have a tax return filed previously, that they would be having their rebate paid automatically. So that's one. The pandemic paycheck protection program. There's a small business program there that I mentioned, the paycheck protection program that I mentioned, that was the loan forgiveness, which will take a loan and then that becomes a grant if you retain your employees, and that nonprofits are eligible for as well. Then there's also the extra $600 a week in unemployment benefits. So people, once they get registered, will be able to see that for an additional 13 weeks.
And Debbie, is that tax-free or is it considered taxable income?
That's a good question. I don't think unemployment compensation is taxable, but I'm not a tax expert, so I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, okay.
By the way, we also included things like making sure that students don't have to repay their loans. They can take a deferment without a penalty, and there's important nutrition assistance in the bill, so that we can make sure that we get more nutrition assistance out to seniors and students and other folks who are struggling as well.
Right. Okay. Another question that came in, I said, we had Director Moskowitz on yesterday, and he is concerned for South Florida and our healthcare system surge capacity. What concerns you the most about our response and preparedness at the federal level?
Yeah, it's been very disturbing that the Trump administration has not taken full charge of making sure that the personal protective equipment that our frontline healthcare providers need to be able to keep themselves healthy and prevent them from spreading the virus. The president has the ability, and while he did invoke the Defense Production Act that gives him the ability to compel domestic manufacturers to produce equipment like PPEs, to produce ventilators and respirators. He has done that in a very, very, very limited way, and continues to leave. And I'm sure that Jared Moskowitz, who we both know well, and who's a Broward favorite son, he's out there, almost like a one-man army fighting 3M, which is the main manufacturer of these masks. He's trolling 3M on Twitter, and I saw a clip of him on Fox News yesterday, taking them on. But that's nuts. I mean, the president has the ability, like he did the other day with GM in a limited way, to direct them to produce specific equipment and personal protective equipment, so that we can make sure that these folks get what they need, and that patients get on ventilators, and that we don't have shortages. So we've got to make sure that the president does this. And right now, I'm hearing nightmare stories from leaders all over the country that they're having to compete with one another. I have colleagues on my text chain. They're all talking about how their leadership is having to compete with one another to be able to get purchases made and actually be able to get there and pick them up, because then FEMA comes in and takes them away for the federal response. It's chaotic and insane, and we're providing the funding in Congress for the production and purchase of these things, and the president is botching the coordination of it.
Wow. So
it's scary.
It's scary, and it's also, I think, we have about 8 minutes, but I think the sad part of all of this is as we continue to listen to the president and his updates, the fact and how he is withholding things from individuals based on whether or not they support him. I just think it's at this time. I think this has nothing to do with politics right now, especially in the time when people are dying. In the way,
right? I mean, Chev, we've heard him say out loud, out of his own mouth, that he's telling the vice president not to call governors back who aren't nice to him, who aren't complimentary and appreciative. I mean, that is nuts. We're dealing with people are dying. I mean, they're projecting a couple 100,000 people in the U.S. alone will die from this virus, and we have the ability to work together and really come together. The president's got to mean it, and so does our governor, by the way. Absolutely.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Sure.
Vice Mayor Brian Johnson, he asked, as you know, chambers of commerce.
Hi, Vice Mayor.
Yeah, he said, especially those that represent women and minority-owned businesses have a heavy burden with assisting our most vulnerable businesses through this crisis. Unfortunately, these essential servants have been left out of all forms of help for themselves. Please advise what can be done to get our local chambers some help so they can continue to help our businesses.
Well, you said local chambers. The local chambers don't have any direct assistance provided, right. But the we do have minority business assistance in the CARES Act specifically. Obviously, minority businesses are eligible for the small business assistance for all of the programs that are appropriated, and the new ones as well as the existing ones. People should go to sba.gov/disaster. So that they can get information about those programs. There's $10 million available for the Minority Business Development Agency in the CARES Act. So that is specific help available to minority-owned businesses. But if he actually meant chambers of commerce, no, there's not assistance for chambers of commerce. We wanted to get this money directly to the businesses themselves.
I'm so fascinated with the fact that we actually have the one who is on the appropriations committee. Y'all don't know how big this is. I'm serious. Y'all should be. Debbie, listen, she sits on the appropriations committee, so she knows all this stuff. There's a question which is, I think, is an easy question, but it's really talking about churches.
Okay.
And the question is saying that what is your advice to churches being known as essential and those churches who still want to get for services on Sunday?
Okay, so sometimes you just have to say things that aren't going to really be received in the most popular way. Right. I really don't think that religious institutions should be meeting in person right now until the public health advisors tell us that it is safe. I am in a church or a religious institution nearly every weekend.
We love having you at Koinonia.
Thank you, and I love being there. But, I mean, look at a sanctuary like Koinonia has, or New Jerusalem, which is in my district as well, or those aren't very, very large capacity facilities. I'm not sure how you would have a full congregation in Koinonia where we are keeping people 6 feet apart and have that many people able to attend. And I know it's hard because there are churches that don't have that technological capability of doing the services virtually. But there is that I know in South Broward we have the pastoral council that serves as a mentoring organization for the many churches we have throughout our community. And I think it would be great if the pastoral council and other pastoral leaders could maybe give some advice, and we can help try to point them in the right direction if they don't have a terribly technologically sophisticated, no insult meant. Maybe we can give some advice on how some churches can deliver services virtually. But if you do absolutely feel like you have to have a service in person, you really shouldn't have any more than 10 people in the sanctuary at any one time. If you have a sanctuary large enough that you can keep the people who attend 6 feet apart, then I guess you could go ahead. But I know I would strongly recommend against having services in person.
We got 3 minutes left. Thank you for that.
Okay.
With the 3 minutes we have left, as you know, we are in as far as Broward County is concerned, we're dealing with the humanitarian issue. Well, we were dealing with the issue as whether or not to allow the cruise ship to come in. What are your thoughts on that?
So, that decision was made finally yesterday, and I will tell you that it took entirely too long for the cruise lines to agree to do the right thing. This really was a very difficult decision on the part of our leaders, and being of the Jewish faith and remembering the St. Louis and how many nations rejected Jews that were persecuted fleeing the Holocaust all around the world back during the World War II era. You never want to. I take to heart that people need to be able to dock and get to their homes, but we also have to do that in a responsible way. And unfortunately, there were, I think, 15 different plans proposed by the cruise lines that all were designed mostly to be save them the expense of having to make sure that they chartered the buses, that they had a plan that got the passengers safely from the ship to the to the tarmac, pay for the chartered planes to fly the individuals outside the country to their home countries. And then, unfortunately, the hole in this plan is that the folks that are supposedly healthy, Chev, are actually, after they're sent to an initial stop at the airport here, then go on airplanes, commercial flights to their home communities. They have to wear masks, but and hopefully they won't be spreading infection if they are, and they weren't tested. So if they are sick, then that's going to be a potential problem. But it finally got done, and we've got some other ships coming behind them. And I certainly hope that plan is as tight as the one that they finally agreed upon.
I appreciate that. And the last question, I'm always for whatever reason I'm trying to end our conversations on what I call a hope note. What?
Good, absolutely.
Yeah, because there's so much happening, right? So
I know.
What would be your message of hope to the people who are watching this now and individuals who will watch it after we finish?
So my message of hope is that there is an end to this. We are all in this together, but we each have to take personal responsibility to make sure that we can give meaning to that. So, reaching out through technology, picking up the phone and calling people, staying in touch with one another through this crisis, and also being personally responsible in terms of heeding the guidelines, so that we can shorten the length of time that we're all having to struggle through this together. But we've seen so much goodness and humanity come out of this crisis, and I just am so amazed at how much we've risen to the occasion. And lastly, I know I speak for you and I that please make sure that you reach out to the people who are elected to be your voice. My office phone number, my staff's all teleworking, but our number is 954-845-1179. And you can also reach out to us through our website, which is wassermanschultz.house.gov, but just Google Debbie Wasserman Schultz and it's the first thing that comes up. We're here to help you. Please know we're here for you.
Debbie, I really appreciate it. I just want Mayor Holdness is on. He just wanted to let us know that they're taking them. They're not taking them commercial flights. They're taking them to charter flights, and they're not going to the terminal.
Right. Okay. Okay. But I wasn't sure if that was happening all the way through to their final destination. I'll give Mayor Holness a call. The Coast Guard told me that initially they were doing that to their first stop, and then as they travel on to their homes around the country, my understanding was they were going to commercial flights. But if that's changed since I last spoke to them yesterday morning, then great.
Exactly. Debbie, I really appreciate you. I really appreciate
Thank you. I appreciate you back. You're such a good and dear friend. And everybody, you just all need to know how fortunate we are to be represented by this good man in the state legislature. And we need to keep him there.
Yeah, we'll be there. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay, take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.